Chapter 25. The Tamaram. Hale woke with a start, Chloe's face next to his. "Wake up. Don't say a word. Do exactly as I say." Hale pushed himself up, reluctant to leave the warmth of his bed, but Chloe's voice was firm, with an edge of urgency to it. She was dressed for travel, her body wrapped in a cloak, a satchel slung over her shoulder, and her battle staff strapped to her back. Her hands were covered in fingerless gloves, her wrists wrapped in leather arm guards. She shook Caitlin, who was asleep in the bed across from Hale, and delivered the same instructions. "Both of you get dressed," Chloe said, tossing their tunics and cloaks to them. "What is going on?" Caitlin asked in the smallest of whispers. "Victor Twenge and his men are outside. Seems like they have done their work quickly." "What about Val and Cody?" "They're at the ship with Gunther. We need to join them." She stopped in the hallway, listened for a beat, then waved at them both to follow her. Hale did his best, still in the process of yanking on his boots, his cloak under his arm, his tunic in his teeth. Caitlin was ready quicker than he, and helped him tie his laces and throw on his cloak. When Hale realized he had left his rucksack behind, he turned to get it, only to have Caitlin hand him his. "Good thing you were thinking for both of us," Hale said, slipping the strap over his shoulder. "Quiet," Chloe said. "Balthazar can only delay so long, but I have a feeling that the back way is already covered by Twenge's men." "Then how do we get out?" Caitlin asked. Chloe looked to the dormer window. It was still early, and fog pressed against the glass. She marched to the end of the hall, turned the latch, and swung open the window. "We'll take the high road." They tiptoed across the floorboards, hopped onto the sill one at a time, and slipped onto the slope of the roof. The shingles were slate and shiny with moisture. Chloe motioned to them to be careful, but 3 stories up they hardly needed the reminder. They sidestepped from one shingle to the next with delicate care, their hands locked with one another. Hale could hear Balthazar as he spoke to someone just outside the door of the tavern. Hale didn't dare peek over the edge to look down on the street, for fear of falling or being spotted. Balthazar's voice carried to him easily in the air, thick with fog. "You don't have the sheriff with you. I don't see why I need to let the lot of you inside. We're not open yet." "Maybe you don't understand. I don't need a sheriff." A smooth voice that Hale recognized as Twenge's replied. "My authority far outstrips his." "Maybe an Antis, but this is Kerith. Still subject to the rule of the High Council of Anthor in Carisans. Carisans is far away, and we're at war here. How do I know you are not imposters?" While Balthazar argued the finer points of geography, politics, and wartime jurisdiction, they sidled to the edge of the roof. A gap of a few feet yawned between the tavern house and the next building over, its roof one of red clay tiles. Hale looked upon them with relief, hoping their grainy surfaces would be less slick than the slate they balanced on presently. Though reaching them across the gap complicated matters. It was a space of a few feet, but with the drop into the alleyway and the snooping bounty hunters below, it might as well have been a chasm of 100 buildings. Undaunted, Chloe made the leap, dropping to her hands and knees and steadying herself, with a hand reached out to the corner of the house's chimney. Once she had found her balance, she turned to Hale and Caitlin. "Hurry, I will grab you." "Hale, you go first," Caitlin said, her eyes peering into the gap and the drop below. "You will have to let go of my arm." "Sorry." She gave a nervous, small laugh and released him, settling herself down to her haunches on the slippery tiles. Without the means for a running start, Hale swung his arms for added force, bent his knees, and jumped. There was a terrible moment when he floated unattached to either house, the space of the alleyway open under him, but halfway over he realized he had enough momentum to carry him across. It would just be landing that was a challenge. He crashed onto the tiles with none of the grace Chloe had exhibited, but the surface was indeed gritty, and he had traction immediately. Chloe's grip was firm on his shoulders as she took fistfuls of his cloak. She helped him to the peak of the roof where he straddled either side, his hands on the chimney. "Now you," Chloe said to Caitlin. Caitlin moved to the edge by inches, her hands trembling. "I don't like heights," she said, her lips crimped into a fine line. "Don't look down. Look at me. It's not far at all, just like leaping a creek or onto a boat." "I can swim better than I can fly," Caitlin said, edging closer. The voices outside the front door of the tavern grew louder. Chloe softened her voice and tilted her head, yet Hale could see her knuckles turn white where she clung to the chimney. "Come on, Caitlin. I know you can do this." Caitlin let out a small cry and made the jump all at once. She landed with a thump on top of the clay tiles and let out a loud sigh. Chloe leaned forward to reach out her hand. At the same time, a tile cracked under Caitlin's foot, and her leg slid out from beneath her. The shard tumbled off the edge of the roof, Caitlin sliding after it. Chloe stretched herself prone across the rooftop and arrested Caitlin's fall, grabbing hold of her rucksack. While Caitlin's feet dangled over the eaves, both of them began to slide until Hale took Chloe's ankle in his hands and braced himself with his legs. "Climb," Chloe said through clenched teeth. Caitlin flailed with her arms until she could wrap her fingers around Chloe's forearm, then her shoulder, as she clawed her way up the length of her body. Finally, she leaned her back up against the chimney next to Hale as he reached down to help Chloe up. Her hand was slick with sweat, the front of her cloak stained with muddy red dust from the tiles, but she soon sat safely beside them. "Well, that was exhilarating," she said, before starting up across the spine of the roof. Hale gave Caitlin's shoulder a quick squeeze and let her follow Chloe ahead of him. The next building was a story shorter, and the thatch roof a gentle pitch. The jump was easier to negotiate, and the thatch the softest landing yet. Hale was more afraid that the roof might cave beneath them than he was of losing his footing and falling off. The three of them crawled on all fours to the closest dormer window, which Chloe rapped on loudly. A sleepy-eyed woman, her hair still covered for the night, pushed open the pane. "Chloe Amberson, what are you doing on my roof?" "Sorry to trouble you, Cynthia. Some unsavory characters in the tavern. We had to take the roof out. Can we come in?" "By all means." Chloe helped them negotiate the sill. Hale set his feet down on the floorboards with a hearty thank you to Chloe, Cynthia, and to the gods. Cynthia's husband stood in the doorway agog, wearing his sleeping garb. "Morning, Henry. Thank you for the assist," Chloe said, passing him on her way to the steps. They trampled down the stairs to the first floor. Chloe turned to them just before she opened the door. "Now walk. Don't run. Our escape depends upon looking natural. Walk to the pier as if it's just another morning, and you're off to do errands with your mother. I'll be right behind you." She turned the knob and opened the front door before they could even respond. Hale and Caitlin stepped out, hooking their thumbs beneath the straps of their rucksacks and walking with as casual an air as possible down the street towards the harbor. Hale chanced a look at the tavern, where in the fog he could make out a line of figures pushing their way past Balthazar into the bird and the baby. He drew his hood up around his face while Chloe descended the steps behind them, a basket borrowed from Cynthia hanging from the crook in her arm. The three of them were the picture of the village family, setting out for morning chores even if they were a bit early. Hale felt calmer once they had turned the corner and were out of sight of the tavern. One of the jays swooped down to land on his shoulder. "Aja, get to Adamantus. We're headed for the ship," Hale said. The jay let out a tremolo that Hale hoped was an affirmative one before flying off. Chloe rounded the corner after them, set down the basket, bunched the edges of her cloak in her fists, and said, "Now, move like you mean it." Their feet splashed through muddy streets, over broken cobblestones, and finally the boards of the pier itself. The Tamaram was moored at the far end of the dock over the deepest water, the shape of its hull outlined in the fog. The boards were crowded with the barrels and boxes that had been unloaded the night before. Among them they found the captain and 3 crew members tied and bound. Cody carried a 4th, also bound and gagged, on his shoulder down the plank of the gangway, while Val made apologies to the captain. Our deepest regrets, sir, but we are commandeering the ship on official business of the Crown. I give you my word that it shall be returned and recompense paid. That's a big promise, Cody said, setting the fourth crewman down against a barrel. I say they're lucky we just don't kill them. As the eyes of the bound sailors grew wide, Chloe made a tisking sound with her mouth. You have not changed at all, have you? She patted the captain on the shoulder. Don't believe a word he says, but his word is gold, she said, pointing to Val. The boards rang out with the sound of running feet. Figures were approaching from the shore, armed with axes, swords, and spears. Best you all board, Cody said, pushing Hale and Caitlin towards the Tamaram. They needed little urging and sprinted up the gangway. Gunther dashed from the wheel well to the masts to lower the two lateen sails. Victor Twenge called out from the dock. You'll add piracy to your crimes, Mandalay. You'll hang for sure if I don't kill you. Two of his men reached the base of the gangway, but Chloe stepped from behind a stack of crates, deflected their spears with her staff, knocked one on his rear, and the second she tripped up and flung into the water. Twenge wove between the cargo to pursue Val himself. Val drew his own staff and caught the swing of Twenge's sword in the center. Twenge's teeth were bared, his eyes burning as he met Val strike for strike, his blade clanging against the strange but solid wood of the elven staff. I won't kill you, Twenge. After all this time, you Oban knights are still fools. More men came down the pier. Chloe and Cody, seeing they were outnumbered, retreated to the ship, which was beginning to draw away from the dock, Gunther speaking charms into the sails. 3 men tried to climb the gangway as it slid off the deck. Cody gave it a kick, and all 3 men went tumbling into the harbor. Captain, ship's leaving, Cody called out. Val could only spare a glance at the departing Tamaram. Twenge had his way blocked. Hale watched with growing panic as the ship continued to slip away from the planks of the dock. Out of the mist, a man screamed. His voice was followed by the sound of another body hitting the water. Azure, Sapphire, and Cyan came swooping through the air, and with a clatter of hooves on wood, Adamantus appeared out of the gloom, casting aside Twenge's men and sending cargo spilling over the dock. Twenge had no time to react, as Adamantus caught him on his antlers and sent him spinning into the harbor. In the same motion, the elk came alongside Val. Val threw a leg over the elk's back and grabbed hold of his fur as Adamantus galloped across the planks of the dock. The elk launched them both into the air, clearing the gunwale and tumbling onto the deck, legs, antlers, battle staff clanging together in a tangled heap. Gunther called out a spell, his voice rising over the clamor of Twenge's men, and the sails stretched out in a gust of wind. Thank you, elk, Val said, spreading out on his back. Adamantus let out a long huff. Couldn't leave without you, or let you leave without me. Chloe drew her sword, lifting it up on guard towards the elk. Oh, yes, Val said. I think I forgot to mention our friend Adamantus here. He has a lot to say for himself.